and that has been going well. I draw your attention to just a couple of things under that in the testimony. What I think is really important to focus in on going forward is what Ranking Member McNerney pointed out, which is that we are entering a period in which there are going to be a lot of licenses that are coming up for renewal. As all of you who are members who have those hydropower licenses in your district know, those can become contentious issues or the sorts of things that your constituents want to keep abreast of. So it's something that I know FERC will want to be working with all of you in terms of getting information out about how that process evolves and how it works. It's going to be a great undertaking for the Commission. I spent the rest of the bulk of my testimony talking about the issue of interstate natural gas pipelines. One of the tables that I submitted in there indicate that as of up to this point, we are within the historical norm of the number of certificates that the Commission has been processing in terms of compression, throughput, and the number of applications that we've been getting. But something that I really want to draw your attention to are the challenges that the Commission is going to face on a going forward basis, and this expands upon my testimony here. If you look at the number of pending applications that we have as compared to the historical trend, we are truly seeing the impact of low-cost natural gas and the environmental regulations which are shutting down coal and really requiring utilities to have some combination of natural gas and renewables. If you look at in August of 2014, the Commission had pending pipeline projects of about 24 BCF per day and about 1,000 miles of pipe. If you fast forward just about a year later, till November of this year, the number of pending applications we have is 50 BCF per day of capacity, so over a doubling in just 1 year, and 4,600 miles of pipe. The Commission is very proud that up to this point we've been able to process in 92% of all cases pipeline applications within a year. I think it's going to be very difficult to maintain that high average when you have this volume of pipelines. And this is where I get into the 111D regulations, and I think it's important for the committee to understand the challenge that regulators at all levels are going to be facing, federal level and state, which is there are tremendous infrastructure needs in terms of pipeline development, in terms of generation on the state side of things, in terms of transmission. But all of this is being done at a time when we have heightened opposition to that very infrastructure itself. And it's very important to understand that in terms of where the 111D regulations are going in terms of timing. Although the EPA did extend timelines for compliance for states by up to 2 years, if you remember the timelines on that, in many states, utilities won't be receiving their state implementation plans until about 2018. Compliance timeline begins in 2022, and yet it's quite clear, at least historically, that it takes for major pipeline projects and certainly for interstate transmission electric transmission projects, it's a 3 to 5 to 12 years or more timeline to develop that infrastructure. The concern is if you make a rapid transition to a new electric generation fleet before you have the infrastructure in place to accommodate that change, there will be an impact on cost. And that has been the case just about everywhere that transition has been made, but you don't have the adequate infrastructure. So it's going to place a lot of pressure on agencies like FERC to ensure that as we go through our processes that we do it right, but it's going to create a timeline challenge, and I think potentially a consumer challenge as well. I finally wrap up my testimony just indicating that where you stand on the CPP is often where you sit, and this plan does not burden all states equally. So there are certain parts of the country, certain states that shoulder a much greater burden under this and will have a much more difficult time meeting it than other parts of the country. Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll be happy to take any questions of the Commission.
Well, thank you very much. And our remaining witness is the Honorable Colette Honorable, and we appreciate your being with us today and look forward to your testimony. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Regarding my thoughts about reliability, infrastructure development, and markets, but this morning I'd like to focus on something you want to hear about, and that's our interaction with the EPA concerning the Clean Power Plan. Our focus on the EPA's Clean Power Plan, finalized in August, has involved engagement, collaboration, and outreach with a diverse group of stakeholders. In early 2015, the Commission hosted 4 technical conferences on whether and how the plan would impact reliability of the bulk power system. We heard from state regulators, from utilities, from regional system operators, from environmental groups, and consumer organizations. These conferences raised a host of issues that informed the Commission's advice and counsel in a letter we sent to the EPA in May of 2015. In this unanimous document, we advised the EPA to consider revising its interim compliance timeline in the draft plan to ensure flexibility in the early years of compliance. We also encouraged the EPA to consider including both a reliability safety valve, which would allow the Commission to work with the EPA to address temporary unexpected impacts on reliability, and a forward-thinking process to provide for ongoing reliability monitoring and assistance, which would rely upon existing planning procedures in states and regions to initially review state plans for potential reliability concerns. The EPA accepted our recommendations in the final rule. Going forward, FERC stands ready to support the work of the states, the regions, and NERC and other reliability entities. The Commission has offered to review analyses or request additional assessments as necessary. We continue holding technical conferences or other workshops as states and utilities will begin complying with the rule. And pursuant to a joint staff working document that informs our interagency work, we will continue participating in future discussions.
You came from Arkansas, and you were on the Public Service Commission there, I believe, and your state has filed a lawsuit as well. So it's one thing for EPA as a regulatory body, in order to implement the President's Clean Energy Plan, to come with this unprecedented regulation. And I understand people say, oh, it's all about politics. But it's more than about politics. It's about existing laws. It's about customary way that we do business in the country. And that's why I think you see so many lawsuits. But I would like for you, Mr. Clark, just to expand a little bit on this timeline issue that you touched on, and just give us some practical insights into that just from the standpoint of, say, North Dakota.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. My concern about the timelines is this. So you have the 2016 timeline. You have the possibility for states to push that out if they request from EPA to about 2018 for the state implementation plan, should they decide to go that route. The compliance targets begin in 2022. Some of them are quite steep for certain states and will be challenging to meet. For example, a state like North Dakota, whose target emissions reduction went from 11% in the draft to 45% in the final rule.
Yeah, and Kentucky went from 18 to 41, and all of those caps were set by EPA. I mean,
yeah, it's the generation fleet is operated. So for some states, it's a bit of a non-event. For some states, depending on the vintage and type of fleet that they have, it'll be much more of an event. The concern with the timeline is this. For a pipeline project, any sort of major pipeline project, 3 to 5 years is probably a conservative time frame from engineering and permitting to construction and in-service state. Electric transmission lines typically are even more difficult than that. 5 years to 10 might be a little bit more average. Heaven forbid you cross any federal land, as happens out west. It could be 12, 15 years to get all the permits that you need to do for a major electric transmission line. And so that's the concern. If you're going to change dramatically the generation fleet, and you need to have a lot more renewables, which really only work over a larger geographic area, and you're going to need a lot more natural gas to back up those renewables or to replace baseload coal that may be going offline, it's going to require some major infrastructure projects. We're starting to see it on the gas transmission side. It'll likely happen on the electric transmission side. These are not projects that are conceived of, permitted, and built within a very short time frame. And the concern is if you change that generation fleet, it can end up costing consumers.
Well, thank you very much. I had a couple of other questions, but my time's already expired. So, Mr. McNerney, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I thank the commissioners for coming today. I got a lot out of all your testimonies, so thank you for your work. And this is an area that I've care a lot about. I spent 20 years in the industry, energy industry, before coming to Congress. Do you have, Mr. Chairman, do you have a mission statement, or does the Commission have a mission statement? Could you sort of paraphrase what that statement is?
Yes, FERC does have a mission statement, and it is to provide efficient, reliable, and sustainable energy to consumers. That's been our mission statement for some time now.
Okay, sustainable. That's a whole different subject. But reliability. Now, concerning reliability, that's one of your primary missions, is reliability. Do you feel, Mr. Chairman, that the Clean Power Plan threatens the reliability of our electrical infrastructure or any of our energy infrastructure?
So reliability is one of our core responsibilities, and Congress gave us that responsibility in the Energy Policy Act of 2005. As Commissioner Honorable noted, FERC held a series of technical conferences. I'm pleased to say on reliability in the Clean Power Plan, I'm pleased to say that the EPA sent someone to each one of those technical conferences, and they had a high-level official appear before us and testify. We later sent a letter to the EPA with certain recommendations. I'm pleased to say that all 5 members of the Commission at the time signed that letter. And then the EPA issued its final rule. And I think it's noteworthy to focus on certain aspects of the EPA's final rule. One thing it did was to push back the initial compliance date from 2020 to 2022. So it allowed industry to have, in the states, to have 2 more years. It implemented a reliability assurance mechanism in that it required state plans to be reviewed by a reliability authority, whether it's NERC, a regional reliability authority, an RTO, ISO, or someone else. The EPA also recognized a reliability safety valve, which Commissioner Honorable noted as well. In addition, the EPA included a glide path towards compliance. So that the period from 2022 to 2030 is broken up into 3-year periods where if a state fails to hit its target in 1 year, it underachieves in 1 year. If it overachieves in the next, that can still help it make its requirements or meet its requirements. And finally, of course, the EPA built in a lot of flexibility. One of the things that they did in their rule to ensure that reliability issues could be addressed was that they allowed states to consider using emissions credits as a means of achieving compliance. The other thing that we've done at FERC is we've entered into an agreement with the EPA and the Department of Energy to meet on a quarterly basis at the staff level to discuss any potential reliability issues. I'm pleased to say that staff has held its first meeting with the EPA and DOE. So this is something that we are going to be watching very closely. In my view, while it will take a lot of hard work, communication, and collaboration between FERC, the EPA, DOE, the states, NERC, the RTOs, ISOs, and industry, I believe that any potential reliability challenges can be addressed.
Thank you. Honorable Lafleur, do you feel that cyber threats and geo threats are significant? Are more significant threats to reliability than the Clean Power Plan?
Well, there are different kinds of threats, but I would say they're more significant because they're systemic, where the Clean Power Plan could have, as several of my colleagues have referred to, different impacts in different areas. A solar storm could have an impact over a larger part of the United States. They're both things we need to obviously focus on.
Thank you. Mr. Clark, you mentioned the number of pending applications. What would help? How could Congress facilitate your response to the increasing number of applications?
I think one of the things that Congress could help with would be to encourage other agencies that inform the FERC siting process, whether it be through LNG siting, whether it on the LNG permit side of things, whether it be on the pipeline side of things. There are a lot of different agencies that inform our process. To the degree that they can do their work in a timely manner to inform our process, that would be helpful from a timing standpoint.
Well, thank you. Mr. Chairman, my time's run out.
Yes, sir. At this time, I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson, for 5 minutes.
I thank my friend from Kentucky, and welcome to our friends from FERC. Y'all's good morning gets even better because my home state of Texas, it's a fact that fellow Texans take care of our own grid for 90% of our states. So we don't get impacted by what you do in many cases, but you're very important to our state, critically important to our home state of Texas. My first question is for you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Clark. Chairman Bay, you've talked about the importance of building gas electric infrastructure for quite some time. It was one of the key themes listed in your Senate confirmation hearing. Obviously, when it comes from an energy state like I do, I want to know how resources get to market. And Commissioner Clark, your comments about the explosion of pipeline application in the future and your testimony talked about how much more dramatic opposition to energy projects is becoming. It's out of control. We're going from a not in my backyard to a not in anybody's backyard. And so my question for both of y'all is, can we speak for a moment on the outlook for energy infrastructure and whether you can see any trends on efforts to block development? The range is clear, fire at will, no agency is spared. Chairman Bay.
Congressman Olson, I think at FERC we have clearly seen increased opposition to infrastructure. One of the things that has happened at FERC over the last, at this point it's probably been 15 months or so, is that our open meetings have been disrupted by protesters who will suddenly stand up during our meeting and try to interfere with our meeting. So we are clearly seeing that, and even in the field when we're holding scoping hearings, it is not uncommon for the staff who do those hearings to report back that there seems to be a great deal of opposition in many communities to the construction of more infrastructure.
Commissioner Clark, your comments, sir, on a not in anybody's backyard attitude in America right now.
Sure. Thank you, Congressman, for the question. I reference this in my testimony that for years the Commission has always taken testimony from, say, affected landowners who might prefer that a particular pipeline go on this piece of their property as opposed to that piece of their property or maybe on someone else's property. Yep. But it's very specific to the line itself. We've seen a bit of a transition in the type of intervention that has appeared before the Commission, which is, my testimony, I call it just say no intervention, which is no infrastructure anywhere. The challenge is that causes all kinds of reliability and cost impacts to consumers if all energy infrastructure is blocked. The Commission has a very important job in balancing the interests of all interveners. The goal of our process is to ensure that the Natural Gas Act is faithfully implemented and that the orders that we get out are ultimately upheld by a judge who can review it and see if the Commission made a reasoned determination, and we have a fairly good track record in that regard.
Yes, sir. Chairman Bay, as you know, the cost of carbon is being discussed in Paris right now at the UN Convention on Climate Change. And as a former naval aviator, it seems to me that some world leaders are proposing checks that they can't cash. I want to dive down on the cost of carbon, social cost of carbon. FERC has said recently that the cost of carbon, the quote-unquote calculator, isn't appropriate for individual LNG projects. You said so in a Sabine Pass decision back in June. You can give me a long answer in writing, but very shortly, can you tell me why it isn't appropriate to use the cost of carbon for individual projects, why it doesn't work, sir?
I would have to review that particular order, Congressman Olson. To my knowledge, FERC has not tried to calculate the social cost of carbon. It is true that when we are reviewing an infrastructure application, under NEPA, we are required to give a, quote, hard look. That's what the courts require of us, a hard look at environmental claims that have been raised. So it may be that someone who was protesting the construction of that facility raised a claim tying into the cost of carbon. I do know that at the end of the day, the Commission did end up permitting that facility. The certificate was granted, as you know.
Great job. One final question, very briefly, again for you, Chairman Bay. Former Chairman Wellinghoff made it his mission to clear a path for energy efficiency. He focused on things like demand response. Back when you took over as a chairmanship, there were some people who said they didn't know what your number one priority would be. What is your number one priority as a chairman of FERC?
Thank you for that question, Congressman Olson. I have tried to take a very balanced approach to my role as chairman. As many of the members have noted this morning, we're going through this period of tremendous change in the energy space. And so I think it's important for FERC to use the statutory authorities that Congress has given FERC to help the markets, market participants, and industry adapt to that change while maintaining reliability and just and reasonable rates. And so I've been looking at what I've been calling the basics, the fundamentals, and that includes our authority over wholesale markets. And thus we've been engaged in this price formation rulemaking proceeding. We've looked at reliability, and as Commissioner LaFleur noted, we've engaged in looking at GMD, and we're continuing to work on cybersecurity, gas-electric coordination issues. And then, of course, there's infrastructure, and that's always going to be an important part of what FERC does.
Thank you. Yield back.
Expired. This time, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 5 minutes.
I want to thank you, our chair and our ranking member, for holding the hearings. And following up my colleague and neighbor from Texas, I would hope my concern is with electricity reliability. I hope your goal is to make sure the lights can turn on, and in August in Texas we can still have air conditioning. I know FERC's responsibility to maintain the reliability of the grid, but you also have a lot of other responsibilities with pipelines, LNG facilities, and oil pipeline rates, to name a few. Chairman Bay, in your testimony, you cite the many responsibilities FERC is tasked with, including reliability, security, and infrastructure. Can you provide additional details on FERC staffing and work products? Does FERC have the resources and personnel necessary to meet the increasing demands placed on the Commission? If you could just briefly, because we only have 5 minutes.
That's a very important question that you raised, Congressman Green, in light of the workload that Commissioner Clark alluded to, and that workload is real. One of the ways that we've responded to...
At this time, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome. I'm going to get a little parochial. MISO released an issue statement acknowledging that no forward planning process exists to ensure long-term reliability in southern Illinois, and that reform to its capacity market process may be required to sustain existing investment and drive future investments and help ensure a reliable electricity supply for consumers. Of course, I'm in southern Illinois, and we've talked about some of the concerns on the most recent auction. But this is kind of a jump ball, whoever wants it. How does the Commission plan to ensure sufficient existing and new generation resources are in place for MISO's Zone 4?
Well, thank you, Congressman Shimkus. As you know, we can't specifically discuss Zone 4 because there are several complaints, including from the state of Illinois, pending before us now.
But that's not, you don't need to talk about the adjudication. This is just a generic question on the question.
I think the primary thing we've been doing is looking very closely at the way the capacity markets actually define the product and what they call for to make sure that they properly pay for what it really takes to keep the lights on. In both PJM and ISO New England, they have set up structures where they create performance requirements and hold generators to them that are, in many cases, baseload generation are the ones that will be needed because they can be there at any time when they're needed. I think those are the sorts of things that have promised to make sure that, I think there's been a concern whether there's something about baseload generation that's being not properly valued, and we have to look closely at the market.
That follows up on my question. MISO has conceded with your endorsement, the FERC endorsement, to largely leave control of resource adequacy to the states. Is that appropriate?
That is different in different parts of the country.
I'm worried about southern Illinois right now.
Well, Illinois is in a somewhat unique situation because a deregulated generation has merchant generation like the eastern markets do, yet it's in the mid-continent ISO where the other states don't have that system. I think that there will be choices to make of both how MISO accommodates a state so different from the rest of them and how Illinois does it.
Well, please keep an eye on this. I'm going to go to Chairman Bay because we know we have decommissioning of coal-fired power plants because of the war on coal, and that's accepted. You all have basically said that. We also are concerned about the decommissioning of nuclear power plants now in Illinois because of just what Commissioner LaFleur just mentioned. So the question is, should baseload generation be compensated for other benefits they provide, such as reliable power, providing essential reliability services, and fuel diversity that they bring to the market, including on-site fuel availability?
One of the things that the Commission has done to try to address in a general way that particular concern, Congressman Shimkus, is to work on price formation in the energy market itself. And so for that reason, the Commission has held a series of technical conferences and in September issued a rulemaking that seeks to align the settlement periods and dispatch intervals in the real-time market and then to allow shortage pricing to be triggered when shortages occur. Those sound very complicated. The basic premise is simple, and that is that resources should be compensated for the value they provide when they provide it. So that certainly will help base load resources that can steadily produce power at many different times of the day. And so the hope is that with more effective price formation, that can send better signals to different kinds of resources, including the kinds of baseload resources that you noted. In addition, the Commission is doing more than that. In November, we issued an order that seeks to gain greater transparency into the causes of uplift and uplift drivers in the RTO ISO markets. And we've also signaled that we're going to look at the offer price caps in the organized markets as well as mitigation issues. So we're doing a whole host of things that are seeking to improve the efficiency of the wholesale markets.
So should this occur in an organized wholesale capacity and energy market subject to your jurisdiction?
Well, in Midwest and the Southern Illinois as part of the Mid-Continent ISO does not have a mandatory capacity market. Just 2 weeks ago, we denied rehearing on an order allowing MISO to continue to have a voluntary capacity market. That would be a major change if they went to a mandatory capacity market as the eastern states have. So right now, Illinois does have the resource adequacy control because they're not required to participate in a mandatory market.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This time, Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Capps, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and I thank Chairman Bay and all the commissioners for your testimonies today. You have covered the many and varied tasks that FERC is responsible for and how these activities directly impact the provision, the transport, and reliability of energy from a variety of sources. However, it is also clear that as we better understand the ramifications of our energy use, we have a greater responsibility to minimize the negative impacts that are associated with our actions. And part of this responsibility is to ensure that appropriate sources of energy are utilized to minimize harmful emissions through the integration of renewables. But we also must look at the impact of transporting these dirty fuels. And that is where I'd like to focus my questions today. While this committee has recently been focused on the work of the Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration, or PHMSA, FERC also has jurisdiction over certain pipeline regulations. Pipelines are ubiquitous in this country. Whether transporting oil or natural gas, these pipelines crisscross the entire country, transporting fuels both within and between states. And depending on the particulars of the pipelines, they are regulated by local, state, or federal groups and agencies. It's also clear that transporting fuels and pipelines may have many risks associated with them. In my district, we witnessed this danger firsthand when the Plains pipeline ruptured and spilled fuel across the land and into the ocean this past May. My first question is for Commissioner Tony Clark. Several agencies are responsible for regulating both oil and gas pipelines in various stages of siting, construction, operation. Can you please explain and elaborate on the responsibility of FERC in regard to both oil and natural gas pipelines?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. With regard to oil and liquid pipelines, the Commission's jurisdiction comes from the Interstate Commerce Act and is primarily associated with economic regulation of the pipeline and non-discriminatory access to the pipeline, common carrier type regulations, but does not include safety or the siting of pipelines, things like that, which would be either under PHMSA or some combination of PHMSA and state and local government. In the case of interstate natural gas pipelines, the Commission has much greater degree of oversight of the interstate natural gas pipelines. So in addition to the economic regulation, the Commission also oversees the physical siting of the project itself. Again, with regard to safety, although some of those safety costs work their way into FERC jurisdictional tariffs and rates, the actual safety regulations themselves would not be FERC jurisdictional. It would again be.
As a follow-up, could you please describe how FERC ensures that sensitive environments, like those in coastal regions of my district, are not negatively impacted by the siting and construction of natural gas pipelines?
Sure. Thank you again for the question. The way that FERC ensures environmental protection is through being the lead agency for NEPA reviews on any interstate natural gas pipeline. And so FERC basically plays a role ensuring that all of the other agencies that might wish to comment, public which might wish to comment, and are able to do so in a way that we have a fully developed record in front of us to ensure that we're meeting the environmental standards that are set up both in the Natural Gas Act, but also those requirements that are set forward through NEPA.
Thank you. For Chairman Bay, while FERC has jurisdiction over some aspects of pipelines, as Commissioner Clark has just outlined, FERC is just one of several agencies with pipeline jurisdiction. After the Plains oil spill in my district earlier this year, we dealt extensively with both the EPA and PHMSA, but it is clear that our communities are relying on many agencies and their cooperation, or lack of, to protect our local lands. So, Mr. Chairman, does FERC work with other agencies to ensure that the siting and operations of pipelines is done in a way to maximize safety and minimize risks, and how does this happen?
Yes, thank you for the question, Congresswoman Capps. During the application process in which a pipeline is seeking to receive a certificate from FERC, as Commissioner Clark noted, we have to do a NEPA review. And as part of that NEPA review, we have to work with many other agencies, state agencies, but federal agencies as well. And the federal agencies include EPA and PHMSA. And so we work with them. We also work with state authorities. And if there is an aspect about the proposed pipeline route that is problematic, certainly we have the authority to tell the pipeline to reroute the line. During the application process, pipelines will provide alternative routes as well for FERC to consider, and then we have to do an analysis about which pipeline route seems to be more prudent.
Thank you. I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman, but I had a follow-up question that I wish I could get a written reply to, and that is the collaboration between FERC and agencies like EPA and PHMSA. Are they successful in working together to mitigate negative impacts, or are there opportunities to improve the level of collaboration and communication as these pipelines make a very complex intersection around the country? So if we could get that back in writing, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. So we'll note that, and y'all can get back to us on that. This time, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta, for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and to the commissioners today, we greatly appreciate you being here for your testimony. I'm going to kind of follow up on the gentlelady from California on a question that she has. It is FERC's responsibility to make information available and notify the public about a project's status and its schedule. FERC staff testified in support of bringing this information together in one location on FERC's website, and this is addressed to the chairman and Commissioner Clark. Do you support the concept of a project dashboard where the public can see the schedule established by FERC and the list of actions required by each applicable agency to complete permitting? Chairman?
Thank you, Congressman Latta. I think that's an interesting idea, and certainly I share the goal of providing transparency into the project applications that FERC is considering. Currently, that information is available through eLibrary, where all the filings relating to a project are placed and where they are accessible to the public. It can be harder, I think, for a member of the public, however, to find the right document. So the idea that you've presented is an interesting one, and I'd like to talk to staff some more, as well as my colleagues on the Commission, to get their views. Certainly, though, we support the idea of providing transparency into the work that we do.
Thank you. Commissioner Clark?
Congressman Latta, I think it's an absolutely worthy goal. The issue of transparency into exactly how Commission processes work is very important in terms of especially a landowner who, for example, may be being contacted by an infrastructure development company, a pipeline company, and doesn't know where to turn to next. And for those of us who live and breathe the world of regulation every day, sometimes it can seem simple to maneuver our processes. To someone who's never seen the FERC webpage before, they might not be quite so simple. So I think a sort of a look at that with fresh eyes is probably something that makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. And again, both to the Commissioner Clark, but also to the Chairman, based on hearing from my constituents, reviews such as route planning and safety coordination would be important to include in this project dashboard to make the information more easily accessible to the public. Will these kind of ideas be included? Chairman?
I'm certainly happy to consider those ideas, Congressman Latta. One thing I would note is that FERC actually has a toll-free number for landowners who have questions or concerns. We receive hundreds of calls each year from landowners. The calls go to our dispute resolution service, and I'm pleased to say that they oftentimes can provide helpful information and guidance to landowners who have some sort of concern.
I would concur in the Chairman's comments. I would also add that one of the things that I've talked about with FERC staff is as we go out into the public and have scoping meetings and hearing public meetings and things like that, as we've talked about before, there's a lot more interest in these hearings than we've had in the past. Sometimes it's from interveners and folks who just simply don't want infrastructure at all. But what's, I think, very important is that we ensure, from a staff standpoint, that we continue to ensure that the actual landowner who's affected when they walk into that room has that opportunity to speak on the record so that they can have their views known about a particular infrastructure project that is directly affecting them. And it's getting to be more of a challenge because the hearings, there are a certain number of hours and there's a lot of people that show up, but we need to make sure that we have those avenues for people who are directly impacted by the infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Clark, I understand that under the Clean Power Plan, municipal electrics and rural electric cooperatives that are not currently regulated by state public utility commissions would be required to come under state regulatory jurisdiction for purposes of the Clean Power Plan compliance. In your experience, is this a dramatic change, and how will this impact the ways munis and co-ops do business in the future?
Congressman Latta, I think depending on the state and how the state decides to go about an implementation plan or a federal implementation plan, it could be a big change. I know in my home state of North Dakota it would be. The issue is that you're effectively requiring a state to come up with a sort of carbon integrated resource plan for the state as a whole. Obviously, municipals and co-ops are a big player in certain states, but traditionally have not been regulated in an integrated resource plan way that traditional utilities have been. So depending on the state, it could be a big change.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chair, my time is about to expire, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. This time recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Bay and members of the Commission, welcome. And thank you for appearing before the committee today. And one of the concerns that I've voiced repeatedly in these hearings is that the Clean Power Plan may jeopardize our fuel diversity, and in particular that we could lose baseload power like coal and nuclear. Do you share these concerns, and if so, what do we do about that?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Doyle, and thank you for the welcome. I indeed share your concerns, even hearkening back to my days as a state regulator. I believe that fuel diversity is really key in ensuring reliability. And going forward, even in these dynamic times, even aside from the implementation of the Clean Power Plan, industry and states are already moving toward cleaner and more efficient energy portfolios. And so it's imperative that we protect fuel diversity. I believe we need it all, and we especially will going forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Commissioner LaFleur, in your testimony, you highlight the recent shift in resources used to generate power, and you go on to highlight FERC's oversight of capacity market changes to ensure reliability is properly valued and sustained. So given the pressure from markets and rules like the new Clean Power Plan to shift away from traditional baseload sources of power, what is FERC doing to ensure our constituents that we can turn on the lights when they're needed most?
Well, thank you, Congressman Doyle. I think we're really working on several fronts. First of all, in the markets, we are trying to make sure that the markets properly and transparently value the reliability, including the reliability that baseload provides. And that's resulted in changes in the capacity market and ongoing work that may lead to changes in the energy market to make sure that those resources, especially the existing resources, are fairly paid for what they contribute. Secondly, the reliability standards have a role in making sure that essential reliability services, things like black start and voltage support that some of those big plants provide, are properly accounted for and required. And there's a lot of work going on under the auspices of NERC to adapt the standards to changes in power supply. And finally, I think we need to work closely with the EPA, as we did on MATS, so that as implementation starts, we keep an eye on regions of the country that may have an issue and be there early enough to intervene if we need to.
I know in light of the polar vortex at PJM, included additional capacity performance standards in their markets. Do you think these are they properly value baseload power?
Well, we do have a rehearing pending, but I voted for the order and strongly supported the early order because I thought that it was a fuel-neutral way to define what reliability meant in a way that, yes, it has an impact on baseload power, but it was defined in a neutral and fair way. So I supported that order. Now we're starting to see the results, and we'll be looking very closely as it's implemented.
And since the adoption of those reforms, have you seen any adverse effect on renewables?
So far, but no.
I want to talk briefly, too, about cybersecurity because I believe that's very important, too. And Commissioner, you've mentioned the growing importance of that and how this presents a relatively new challenge for FERC. You said that these issues present different challenges and continue to say in many cases we don't have the benefit of decades of experience to draw upon. Well, I'm proud to point out that we do have decades of experience in Western Pennsylvania, particularly at Carnegie Mellon University Scilab, which is a global leader in this field. And to what extent can FERC grow and develop relationships with institutions like Scilab to ensure our grid remains secure?
Well, institutes like Carnegie Mellon are doing critically important work, and we do have an Office of Energy Infrastructure Security. They don't work on standards, but they work on collaborative relationships with universities, industry, and other agencies, and we would welcome more engagement with Carnegie Mellon. One of the things that's going on at the university level that I think is so critical right now is designing parts of the grid to build in more resilience on the front end. So we'll get away from standards and retrofitting and really building the grid better. That's where the future lies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. This time the chair recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Harper, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to each of you for being here and the work that you're doing. Chairman Bay, if I may ask you, many retail tariffs allow net metering of consumption of electric power by end-use customers against on-site generating sources. In particular, we're seeing a proliferation of these on-site rooftop solar arrays by commercial and residential retail customers. Because the distribution grid and transmission grid are interconnected and both constitute the stream of interstate commerce, should FERC exert jurisdiction over net metering arrangements in any respect?
The Commission issued an order in 2009, Congressman Harper, called Sun Edison, in which the Commission ruled that rooftop solar was not subject to FERC's jurisdiction over wholesale markets as long as during the relevant billing period, the person who owned the rooftop facility or unit was a net user, not a net seller of energy. And so that's been the line that FERC has drawn in its order. And I think it's important to note that that order, as a result, respects traditional state authority in this area. One concern that I think some would have, were FERC to go further, would be that there would be a fairly dramatic preemption of state authority by FERC. And so I think that poses some real questions about where you want to draw that line regarding the allocation of authority between the federal government and the states.
Yes, sir. You know, of course, technically, you could argue that these net metering...
Very engaged on reliability issues and any potential reliability issues relating to the Clean Power Plan. So we have already entered into this agreement with the DOE and EPA to have staff meet on a quarterly basis. As I indicated, staff has already met, and we are going to be monitoring what happens during the process, and also a potential resource if states have questions of us with respect to their plans. And as Commissioner Honorable noted, if necessary, we will hold technical conferences and do other follow-up. But I want to assure you that we are very engaged on this issue.
Do you think reliability may be subject to litigated outcomes?
Not clear to me, since there's a reliability safety valve and there is this basically this glide path towards compliance. So we'll have to see what happens.
Thank you, and I appreciate that very much, Chairman Bay, and I yield back.
Chairman yields back. This time, Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know, excuse me, numerous members of the House and Senate have expressed their concerns with the pipeline permitting process. And, Mr. Chair, your testimony states that there's a need for more natural gas pipeline infrastructure. I don't necessarily disagree, but I do know many communities through which these pipelines pass have legitimate concerns about safety, noise, and air and water pollution from construction and the operation of those associated facilities. And I know Commissioner Clark's testimony mentions a just say no attitude to any new project. That might be the case for some, but there are many, many people that have legitimate concerns and believe the public has been shut out of the process. So, Mr. Chair, can you explain FERC's public comment process for pipeline siting?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Tonko. FERC tries to provide a tremendous amount of process to stakeholders who could have an interest in a pipeline project. And so throughout the process, whether it's pre-filing, when scoping meetings are being held, or even after a filing has been made by the project developer, we welcome comments from the public. And so there are many ways that people can get those comments to us. They can get those comments to us at the meetings, the scoping meetings that are held, but they can also send us written comments as well, and those comments will be made part of the record. But it's very important for us to hear from members of the public who have an interest in the project, whether they're for it or against it, and for us to consider those comments when we evaluate the project.
And just specifically, how does FERC proactively conduct its outreach to affected communities?
One thing that we do is to provide notice of the scoping meetings that we hold. And so those notices go out to communities along the path of the pipeline. They typically last for several hours. There is a court reporter there. The meeting can be transcribed. So that is one of the ways we get notice to the public. But certainly throughout this process, staff tries to make clear to the public that their comments are welcomed and that they can submit those comments to FERC for FERC's consideration.
And then how are comments from federal, state, and local officials as well as the general public considered, particularly concerning requests to extend those deadlines that are associated with the review process?
So we certainly consider the requests of other officials as well, including state officials. And we then decide when we get those requests whether or not more time is warranted. I should note that even if a formal window has closed with respect to some stage of the processing of an application, if a member of the public submits a comment, that can still be made part of the record. So it's not like the door is slammed shut on someone.
And have you found engaging local stakeholders to be productive in determining the appropriateness of a project or its scope?
I think it's critical that we engage with local stakeholders. And one of the things that we've also done is to publish a best practices manual for pipelines. And one of the things that we do in this manual is to encourage them to do the outreach to the communities along the path of the pipeline. That it's very important, in other words, for the pipelines to start to develop a relationship with the members of the public who could be impacted by the infrastructure.
And when a project is changed, such as being rerouted to pass through different communities, does FERC make an effort to extend the public comment period and engage newly impacted people?
It probably depends upon the stage of the process when that change is occurring. Many changes can actually occur during the pre-filing process, and so there might be an opportunity there for the public to provide comment. I might have to talk to staff and get back to you on that one, Congressman Tonko, so that I can explain in a more specific way how the record can be developed. So I'd be happy to do that. I can tell you, though, that even when we issue a certificate, there are dozens of conditions that are attached to the certificate, and these conditions are intended to remediate any potential impact from the pipeline.
And when any of that new information is released late in the scoping process, do you believe it warrants more time for public comments and analyses?
I think it depends upon what the development is. But certainly, again, we welcome comments from affected stakeholders.
I thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Chair, at this time, recognize the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess to understand FERC, you have to understand how we got here. What are the issues that you have to face? And I'm looking back on just and globally with what's been said over the years globally, and certainly being said in Paris today and in the next few weeks, because all of this sets the tone for the issues that you have to face. And I look back at some of the quotes that have been used over the years. People have said things like the IPCC, one of the lead authors, said on energy, he said that we must redistribute de facto the world's wealth by climate policy. Then you have a former Canadian minister who said that no matter if the science of global warming is all phony, climate change provides the greatest opportunity to bring about justice and equality in the world. Or then we go to in the Earth Climate Summit down in Rio, they say we may get to a point where the only way of saving the world will be for the industrialized civilization to collapse. That sets the stage then for this administration and the EPA to be emboldened to enact a lot of regulations because they're drinking the Kool-Aid. So here's what we have is they've moved on this. And now as a result, I feel sorry for you at FERC because I think primarily you're just cleaning up after someone else. You don't seem to, it doesn't come across to me as you have a seat at the table on our national energy policy. You're just having to implement what someone else has done, how they've been influenced by the global community. It's almost as though you remind me Captain Smith on the Titanic, just managing a sinking ship. So I'm wondering, given that that's the attitude, all these regulations, and I can remember sitting here just a few years ago when Commissioner Moeller made the remark that if we don't do something to replace the coal-fired power plants that have been shut down across America, his quote was, the new federal environmental regulations could lead to rolling blackouts in the Midwest by the summer of 2016 unless action is taken to boost reserve generating capacity. I don't think we're doing anything on that. And 2016 is just around the corner. And then I look about your own policy statement says you're to regulate reasonable cost at reasonable cost. I live in a state that 98% of the power is generated from coal. And because of the regulations and the closure of 7 power plants and ultimately more gigawatts of power, we're already experiencing a 47% rate hike on utilities. How is that reasonable? I think you failed. But maybe you failed because I don't know that you have a seat at the table. So I guess it would go back to Commissioner Clark. How would you respond? Where are we building the coal-fired power plants? How are we going to reject this globalization that's going on and the attitude that's got us to the point that we're afraid to burn coal? We're afraid to burn gas.
Congressman, as I indicated in my testimony, I think the Clean Power Plan 111 deregulation certainly put regulators at both the state and federal level in a very precarious position, which is that while it's not being promulgated by FERC or by a state public utility commission, most of the potential negative outcomes that could be related to it, whether it's a matter of affordability or reliability in that state, all directly fall on our shoulders because those are the areas that we have responsibility over, and we know if the lights go out or if costs start to spiral out of control, it will be public utility commissions at the state level and FERC at the federal level that will be answering those questions. So certainly it creates challenges for us. With regard to the concern about cost, I think in certain states it's something that is a very real concern to have. It's one that I have as a North Dakotan. I indicated in my testimony that our state health department, who's putting together our SIP, estimates that if we were to enter a carbon credit trading program in North Dakota, it would be a $400 to $450 million annual tag. It's an estimate. It could be more. It could be less. But that's the figure that they're using in a state of about 750,000 people. That's obviously a huge impact. So these are all concerns that are legitimate.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, in the time I have left, what are we doing? What is FERC doing about authorizing more power plants to be constructed, or was Moeller wrong?
Under the Federal Power Act, we don't have the authority to order the construction of new power plants. And under the Federal Power Act, FERC has always taken the position that it has to be resource neutral. But what we have tried to do is to improve the efficiency of the energy markets and the capacity markets so that they send the right signals to resources. And so that's where we have focused our attention, while also always making reliability a priority.
Gentleman's time has expired. At this time, I recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Castor, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, and thank you all for being here. The former FERC Chair, John Wellinghoff, recently raised a concern over the very significant investments in natural gas resources by utilities. He said that these huge investments are happening at a time when battery storage and renewable resources appear to be growing, and that such significant, maybe even unbalanced investments in gas resources could put customers at risk, the folks we represent back home, for future. Our neighbors could be on the hook for these investments. You can't argue with the fact natural gas, the prices have remained very low. This has been a benefit, but Mr. Wellinghoff warned that the falling cost of renewable energies and energy storage could outpace cheap gas in the future. He called it very risky for consumers, and some utility leaders have echoed this concern. Chairman Bay, you just talked about how FERC has a responsibility to look at the energy markets. What is FERC's view, especially now with the incentives of the Clean Power Plan to reduce carbon pollution?
FERC has relied upon economic signals from the market to determine whether or not additional gas infrastructure is needed. And one of the ways we evaluate that is when a project developer holds an open season we look to see whether or not the capacity that would be provided by the pipeline is subscribed, whether there are precedent agreements. And so that can be a pretty clear signal as to whether or not the market thinks that that capacity is necessary. But it's important to note that it is the market that's driving these decisions. So it's not like ratepayers are necessarily on the hook for the contracts that might be entered into with the gas pipelines. And so that does, I think, provide some protection to consumers. And if the payoff time is quick enough on this pipeline and the investment, I think that that investment in the pipeline can be a benefit to consumers. It really depends upon the capacity constraints in a given region in the country.
And furthermore, on consumer protection and demand response, traditionally demand response was viewed as applicable to retail electricity policies and therefore within the jurisdiction of the state public utility commissions. However, as electricity markets evolved in the wake of the Energy Policy Act of 2005, demand response began to evolve into a wholesale issue, and accordingly FERC issued Order 745, which attempted to deal with compensation for demand response offered at wholesale. I mean, and demand response is, if you're a consumer out there, I mean, the benefits are quite robust. It can and for states now under Clean Power Plan, reduce short-term electricity cost, avoid the need for more investments in generation, transmission, those very expensive plants you have to build, and bring environmental benefits. Now, the order was challenged. It was argued before the U.S. Supreme Court. Chairman Bay, you have a very distinguished legal career. Did you attend the oral argument at the Supreme Court?
Yes, I did, Congresswoman Castor. Actually, I think every member of the commission
everyone
was
did.
at that oral
Isn't it
argument.
interesting? You should do that if you're ever here in Washington. Please go to an oral argument. It's fascinating. But can you read the tea leaves for us and give us what the outlook is? I know one justice had to recuse himself, so what's your expert analysis of the court?
You're right. Justice Alito recused himself. 8 members of the court will be deciding the issue. If there's a tie, then the decision of the D.C. Circuit stands. I think it's really impossible to read the tea leaves. I have to confess.
I knew you were going to say that.
I have to confess to you, though, Congresswoman Castor, that every time I've ever tried to read the tea leaves, I get it wrong. So probably if I ventured an opinion today, you would do well to bet on.
So could you go through, there are a couple of potential outcomes. Could you run through those quickly? I mean, the awful thing would be if FERC does not have, if we don't continue to promote demand response.
I think there are a number of possible outcomes. The court could say that FERC does have jurisdiction, and it could also affirm the compensation that Order 745 allowed for demand response. So that's at one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, the court could either deadlock, which means the decision of the D.C. Circuit stands, or the majority of the court could decide that FERC lacks jurisdiction, in which case it doesn't reach the compensation issue. Somewhere in between, the court could say that FERC has jurisdiction, but that its compensation scheme was not sufficiently explained and could remand on that particular issue. So there are a range of possible outcomes. My colleague, Commissioner LaFleur, likes to cite to Yogi Berra for that famous saying that the difficulty with predicting the future is that hasn't yet happened. And I have to confess to sharing Yogi Berra's sentiment in that regard.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Gentlelady's time has expired. At this time, I recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Kinzinger, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today and spending your morning with us. I'm sure it's exciting. Chairman Bay, as part of FERC's responsibility to oversee the reliability of the bulk power system, you recently approved new critical infrastructure protection standards to address physical threats and weaknesses of the grid. These standards are designed to enhance the grid's physical security and reduce areas of vulnerability. In your mind, what more can and should be done to ensure the physical security and reliability of the grid?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I have to say that Commissioner LaFleur and Commissioner Clark deserve a lot of credit for the physical security standard because they were on the commission at the time that the commission adopted it, and under Commissioner LaFleur's leadership, that standard was adopted. So I think that is a very important start. In addition, there are critical infrastructure protection standards that have been in place for some time now. We're up to version 5. The Commission is considering version 6. One of the things that we're looking at with respect to the SIP standards is GMD, the second stage of that particular standard, which would create a benchmark event, require utilities to assess their system against that benchmark event, and then come up with strategies to deal with any potential problem. So that's certainly something that we're looking at. Another aspect of cybersecurity that we're looking at deals with the supply chain and whether or not there should be a standard in that area. We had issued a notice of proposed rulemaking, and we've decided to do a technical conference on that issue. So we will be bringing in industry and we'll be getting their views.
Okay. I might have to cut you off because I have two more quick questions,
Sure.
if you don't mind. And in regards to the EPA's Clean Power Plan, what position would FERC take if it were asked to issue a declaratory order related to the reliability impacts of state plans and request for the exercise of the reliability safety valve?
I guess I would want to know what the specific details were with that particular proposal. Under MATS, the EPA can request a technical opinion from FERC relating to the reliability issue that would be posed if a unit closed down. Under the reliability safety valve currently contemplated by the EPA's Clean Power Plan, there is no mechanism, no formal mechanism requiring FERC input, although certainly we are happy to provide it if the EPA requests our views.
So would you, if you were asked to make a declaratory order, you'd be willing to or be open to working with them on that?
Yeah, I don't know that I would call it a declaratory order, but certainly we could provide them with our technical views.
Okay. And then, Mr. Clark, recently you spoke on efforts at the state level to support nuclear power. Specifically, you pointed out that states that encourage the growth of nuclear power are going to end up with two different regulatory regimes that don't fit together very well. And that this is going to impact FERC and negatively impact how prices are formed in wholesale markets. If you want to expand on that, and also, doesn't a two-tier system basically already exist since all clean resources other than nuclear have out-of-market payments, subsidies, and everything that impact their bid price?
Thank you for the question. It's an excellent one. It often comes into play with regard to nuclear power, and it especially becomes a question, an issue with regard to the Clean Power Plan being out there, because remember, the grid operates on a regional basis in terms of market signals that are sent, but states, state by state, have to meet their in-state requirements, or will, should the Clean Power Plan be upheld. So they're managing their fleet in a way that's sort of agnostic of the market itself. The concern with nuclear power is right now if you present a scenario where you have a restructured state, so it's a merchant generation state, you have high state renewable portfolio mandates, you have low-cost natural gas, that's the marginal unit, and you have big nuclear investments, it's very difficult for that plant to stay open in that regard. So what it will cause states to do that have restructured is to probably in some way, if they want to keep that nuclear plant open to meet their Clean Power Plan goals, it will probably cause them to in some way soft re-regulate the utilities that they had previously restructured. The concern is if you end up in a market that from a wholesale standpoint has been set up to allow pure price signals to determine where investment dollars go and where investment decisions get made, you can reach a tipping point where there are so many out-of-market solutions that are being imposed on the market that the market isn't creating the proper price signals that are needed.
Okay, thank you. And, from my district with 4 nuclear power plants, it's very important. So I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. This time, Chair recognizes gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Loebsack, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This has been an enlightening hearing. I really appreciate all of you being here today. Poor folks who are still here, they get to Chairman Bay, when it comes to reliability and what specifically is being done at the present time.
I think the main thing that we can do is to work closely, we at FERC, to work closely with the EPA, DOE, state regulators, NERC, the regional reliability entities, the RTOs, ISOs, industry. I think we just have to work very closely together and to monitor the situation to see whether or not there are any potential reliability issues, and if so, what needs to be done to address them. I don't think that you necessarily need a new reliability standard or anything like that, but I think you take the standards that you do have and you make sure that they are being followed, and you make sure that you work well with others.
Did you want to say something? Okay, well, I do have a question for you, Ms. LaFleur. Yeah, when we're talking about the grid, I have a real concern about the physical protection of the grid. Cyber is one thing, but actual physical protection of the grid is another thing entirely. We're a big country. It's very, very difficult, obviously, to protect the grid from some kind of attacks from someone abroad, domestic, whatever the case may be. But can you address that question?
Yes, I think the physical security of the grid is very important. I think the most frightening thing would be some kind of coordinated attack that was a physical attack or a systemic attack on different parts of the grid. I think that the standards that we've put in place, which require every transmission owner to identify the most critical facilities and then protect them, are an important step. But I think beyond that, a lot of the protection has to come from how we build the grid. Building in more redundancy so we kind of decriticalize those places so that a physical attack won't cause as much damage, and building in more standardization so if something goes wrong, we can share transformers more rather than having to build a custom one in every place.
You're kind of answering my next question, which was building the grid better. That's what you mentioned earlier. That's specifically the kinds of things that you're talking about when you say building the grid better?
Yes, I think that's really the future, is to think about how do we build a more robust grid in a world where there's so much more security, so many more security issues.
Right. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that particular issue on the grid? Did you want to say anything, Mr. Clark?
I would second everything that Chairman Bay and Commissioner LaFleur have indicated. It occurred to me during one of the questions, something that I think the Commission can do in terms of reliability and integrating the renewables that you talked about is something that the Commission recently had a series of presentations on at one of our recent meetings, which is the issue of energy storage. Right. If renewables are to be brought on in a way that really makes sense and makes them even more valuable, energy storage as a means of compensating for their inherent intermittency is something that could be very important. So the Commission's been studying that.
I think that's a great idea. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. This time, recognize the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Long, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I figured you were going to ask me where I'm going after this hearing. And where I'm going is down to the Rayburn Foyer to sign cards for our troops for the American Red Cross. And I'd like to remind our other members of the committee that they can join me down there. So you just look like you wanted to ask that question, Mr. Chairman.
I really appreciate your letting us know about that. Thank you.
Commissioner Clark, in referring to the EPA's carbon regulations, you mentioned in your testimony that there is a potential tension between the 111D rules and infrastructure, especially in the timeline for compliance and in potential for a large generation resource shift away from coal in order to comply. In my state of Missouri, for instance, we rely on 83% coal for our energy generation. My question is, what is FERC doing to help ensure that reliability, resource adequacy is maintained during this period of transition, given the length of time needed to develop and implement infrastructure projects?
Sure, Congressman, thank you for the question. I think it comes forward in a number of different ways. As I indicated, the infrastructure challenge is a key one. So FERC needs to continue to do its work in terms of how we process those applications that are in front of us. In terms of the Clean Power Plan, I think it's going to be critically important for FERC to be actively involved with other stakeholders. Sometimes it's with the markets in a region that is very market-oriented. Sometimes it's going to be close collaboration with states, and those states have chosen to remain fully vertically integrated. But it's collaboration with those stakeholders is going to be absolute key. I think we're going to need to do a lot of work with entities like NERC, who have technical expertise in terms of the operations of the grid. It needs to be under constant assessment, and we need to do that assessment as soon as we know what those state implementation plans look like, because until we know what the state implementation plans and federal implementation plans for those states that choose to go that route, until we know what they look like, we're kind of shooting in the dark here, because we can't really model scenarios that are that open-ended. So I think after we begin to see what those look like, we'll be able to do more substantive work. But I think it's something that we absolutely have to have a voice in, given our technical expertise in both markets and reliability at FERC.
Okay, thank you. I found something else real interesting in your testimony. You also state that intervention in regulatory proceedings is trending towards just say no, which is designed to block entire classes of infrastructure projects through a strategy of outright denial or defeat through delay. Could you expand on that?
Sure, Congressman. What I was noting is something we've talked a little bit about here this morning, which is the trend towards intervention that we typically didn't have in the past, which is that certain resources in and of themselves, you have intervener groups that wish to block the entire development of that resource, not that they believe that there's a particular problem with a particular line, it's that they have a concern with all infrastructure and would like to see it blocked. The challenge becomes in an era where it's quite clear in my mind that to meet environmental regulations and where the market is going in some cases in an affordable, reliable manner, you're going to have the infrastructure. Dealing with that tension is going to be a challenge for commissions at both the state and federal level going forward. We want to ensure...
What kind of impact will it have on the commissions?
Well, from one standpoint, I think the commissions, and we've seen this here at FERC, I think you probably have seen it at the state level as well, you have a lot more applications that are being put forward in terms of infrastructure needs, so you have more pending dockets. At the same time, you have more intervention in opposition to those dockets. It creates a challenge for commissions. Ultimately, if the infrastructure is blocked in total, it creates challenges for consumers because you don't have access to the otherwise affordable energy that you might have.
And what type of projects are you talking about?
In the case, Congressman, of the electric sector, it can be transmission lines, which are cited at the state level, although FERC has a lot of authority over interstate transmission. We don't cite it. But the interstate transmission lines are often put up to accommodate renewables that have seen significant growth. In the case of interstate natural gas pipelines, it's because you have coal plants that are going off, and as of right now, the market signals indicate that in most cases you're building natural gas to replace the coal, so you need to hook up the new natural gas plant. Sometimes it's because you have to have peaker units that tend to be natural gas because they pair well with renewables because they have fast ramping resources. So everywhere where there's been a transition to higher intermittent resources and more natural gas units, but you don't have the electric transmission lines and pipelines in place at the time that transition is made, you end up with very high costs for consumers. It's been the case across the world where that's happened. It's been the case in certain regions of the country, as the chairman noted in his opening statement.
Okay. I see my time's expired. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Jimmy yields back. This time, Chair recognizes the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've got two questions, one relating to renewables and then the other about how we pay for natural gas infrastructure. By the way, what you were just saying about the just say no, I mean, it really does sort of have an element of public participation, whether it's about coal plant or it's even about solar. So we in Vermont have a lot of renewables, but the siting issues are oftentimes very, very controversial. So it is something that we have to wrestle with independent of what that power source is. And the chairman indicated in his opening statement that the whole array of power sources, from coal to renewables, is a big deal. And depending on what your state mix is, it really has a significant impact on what you think is the proper approach on infrastructure. In Vermont, we've had a long tradition of utility-supported renewables. In fact, Green Mountain Power, our major utility, has been the leader in this. Efficiency has played a major role, again, with the support of our major utilities. And the big and demand response, obviously. So I'll ask first Mr. Bay and Mr. Clark, in respect to infrastructure planning, where does that fit in to your scheme? Because the decisions that are made about an infrastructure decision really do have an impact on the power that can be deployed with the benefit of that. I'll start with you, Mr. Bay, and just quickly on it because we don't have much time.
Sure. I think that's an important question, Congressman Welch. States obviously engage in integrated resource planning. FERC itself does not, and FERC has always taken the position that it should be resource neutral under the Federal Power Act. So as a matter of choice, we have not tried to evaluate or to pick which resources should prevail in the market.
Right. But there is a practical issue. This is something we're debating in Vermont. If you put in a major infrastructure item, it's going to then drive power decisions to that. So how do you find that balance? By the way, I want to say thank you to Member Honorable for coming to Vermont. We're delighted to have you up there. I mean, can you comment on that?
Certainly, and it goes back, and great to see you again, Congressman Welch. It goes back to our embracing fuel diversity. While we recognize we need to move toward a cleaner and more efficient energy infrastructure for all of the reasons that have been discussed, to ensure reliability, diversity, energy security.
Go ahead. I only have a couple of minutes. I didn't mean to interrupt, but thank you. Let me get to financing of natural gas infrastructure by electric ratepayers. We've had a lot of discussion in New England about natural gas supplies.
Potentially financing pipelines through the state authority that each of the states still retain over their load-serving entities. I'm interested in seeing how that plays out in addition to their authority that they have over the natural gas distribution companies. So it's a little bit different approach. It hasn't been presented to the Commission yet. I'm interested in learning about it. I think that stateside approach probably has more opportunity to be successful than what
Commissioner LaFleur, do you have any? Thank you, Dad. And then my time is up, so you get the last word.
I agree with what Commissioner Clark said. This has arisen in New England, as you know, because there's tremendous pipeline constraints there, and the way the markets are structured, it's difficult for any merchant generator to commit to firm capacity. I believe the issue was raised indirectly in the Kinder Morgan pipeline that has been filed, and there's another one that is in pre-filing that will raise it more directly. While not prejudging it, I would seek to be as flexible as we can under our authority to try to find a way to accommodate something a region is trying to do, but it would have to be lawful. That's why the transmission solution has been turned away from.
This time, Chair recognizes the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Elmers, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Rush for holding this hearing today so that we can continue our oversight. And thank you, panel. Commissioners, thank you so much for being with us today. As co-chair of the Grid Innovation Caucus, I look forward to hearing from each of you regarding the threats that the Clean Power Plan poses to affordable and reliable electricity, as well as the path forward to securing our grid, as well as modernizing our nation's infrastructure, energy infrastructure. Chairman Bay, I'd like to start with you. I have a question regarding cybersecurity. Currently, the electric sector has mandatory cyber asset and incident reporting requirements through FERC, NRC, and DOE regulations. Chairman Bay, do you think FERC has sufficient authority over cybersecurity?
I think we do at this time, while recognizing that there is always more work to be done. So we're up to SIP version 5. We're considering SIP version 6. There's some additional standards that we're examining right now. A lot of work has happened, but there will always be more work that we have to do given the nature of the threat.
Do you believe that FERC needs help with your statutory mandate to protect the bulk power system with cyber threats and harm?
I should note one caveat. There should be emergency cyber authority. So thank you for that follow-up question. I understand that the House is addressing this very issue. That emergency authority does not need to reside with FERC. It could reside elsewhere in the federal government, but someone needs to have it. The other suggestion I would make, and again, the House legislation considers this issue, is whether or not FOIA rules should apply to information that is shared between industry and government and vice versa. So I think a fix there could be very helpful as well.
Thank you very much, sir. Commissioner Honorable, I have a question for you. Last year, NARUC approved a resolution seeking to, and I'm going to quote, preserve states' authority to decide the type, amount, and timing of new or existing generation facilities that will be constructed or maintained within the state to achieve legitimate state policy objectives. Then it goes on to say to safeguard and guarantee states' continued right to operate programs to procure new generation or maintain existing generation for reliability, affordability, and environmental purposes, end quote. Does the EPA's Clean Power Plan impact any of these areas which NARUC has expressly resolved to preserve?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. I certainly think this will play out. Clearly, the EPA endeavored to provide the states with flexibility. I served as NARUC president during the time that the resolution evolved, and that was very important and continues to be very important, that the states maintain control. And I support that even in my current role. I do believe that the states have the ability to plan their own resources. There is certainly a lot of opportunity to ensure fuel diversity and reliability as we move forward to a cleaner energy infrastructure.
Thank you so much. My last question is for Commissioner Clark. This has to do with some of the EPA rulemaking, and I'm going to use an example. The reliability safety valve, though very well intended, is really only useful after the rule has gone into effect. Is this correct?
Congresswoman, that's correct.
And you know, and that's wonderful, and we're happy that that safety net is there, except it's kind of after the fact. It's an afterthought, and these decisions are already being made by many of these companies, you know, in our states, having to prepare. So in your opinion, do you believe that as far as the rulemaking for EPA goes, FERC should have a much earlier and much more formal role in the rulemaking process?
Congresswoman, there's contemplated in what EPA issued as a final rule some sort of consultative process with regional planning authorities. I think FERC needs to ensure that we have a robust part in that particular project that'll be undergone. So that would be answer number one. I think there's a second related part of your question that I might address, which is this. There is a concern in states that will need to be moving forward potentially if this is upheld, that they get going on it rather soon. The problem is I hope we don't end up with a MATS-type situation, mercury neurotoxic standard situation, where you may have certain states make enormous investments in meeting a rule that ultimately 3 or 5 years down the line is vacated by the Supreme Court. I would hope either through legislation or through litigation that there at least be a pause in this so it doesn't go into effect and we don't start having some of these large investments being made and then have the states find out that the rule itself wasn't valid. I think that is a big concern.
Thank you, sir, and I agree, and I've gone over my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panel.
Thank you. At this time, Chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Sarbanes, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the commissioners for being here today. Your testimony has been very helpful. Commissioner Bay, it's a pretty straightforward question. There's, I think, bipartisan interest on this committee already reflected in some of the hearings we've held and some of the markups on how to continue to increase the intelligence of our grid, if you will, kind of smart grid technologies, how we stimulate more thinking in that regard and advance those technologies. And there's a recognition, obviously, that there's a major role to play in that on the part of states. Also, ratepayers can become a part of the equation, the private sector, for sure, and that advances all of our goals in terms of dealing with resilience and cybersecurity and distributed energy resources, giving customers more choice, how they relate to the grid, obviously, going forward. I'm interested as well, and I know there's others on the committee. I think Congresswoman Elmers and Congressman McNerney share this perspective in what, for example, the Department of Energy might be able to do by establishing some sort of grant opportunities, programs, collaborative initiatives that they could initiate with the states and with other partners that come together. So, for example, utilities partnering with entities such as national labs and universities, state and local governments, where they're developing some of these advanced smart grid technologies and benefiting with some support from the Department of Energy. And I just wanted to ask you to speak to whether that would be helpful and useful in continuing to push forward that effort on the smart grid.
Thank you for the question, Congressman Sarbanes. I think that's an important question that you're raising. Many of these developments, as you note, are very exciting, and they're happening at the distribution level. And so I do think it's very important for federal agencies, including the DOE and FERC, to work with state agencies and state authorities to see where we can be helpful. My sense is that DOE will be more helpful than FERC in the sense that DOE does a lot of research and development, but FERC certainly can be helpful in incenting some of those technologies as well, not at the distribution level, but at the transmission level, because of incentives that we can offer under Section 219 of the Federal Power Act. But as Commissioner Clark noted, we just did a panel recently on energy storage, and a lot of exciting things are happening there, with some analysts predicting that costs will drop another 50% over the next 5 years from 2015 to 2019. So I guess that's actually 4 years. So a lot of things are happening, and ultimately they will impact both the transmission network as well as the distribution system.
Thank you. Actually, President Obama this morning at his press conference in Paris spoke about how goals were set on where the costs of certain kinds of power generation would be. 2-3 years ago, we set these targets, and we've already exceeded them. That shows what happens when you get these synergies in place. And I think you're right to point to the opportunity for a number of different federal agencies, like the Department of Energy, like FERC, and others, to collaborate in helping to continue to stimulate that in partnership with states, with ratepayers, with the private sector. So I appreciate your answer. Thanks very much, and I'll yield back.
This time, Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Mullen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Commissioners, first of all, I want to thank you for your thorough review of the Grand Lake Dam Authority, GRDA, for granting the variance. It was very important to Oklahoma and to that area, so thank you. I really do appreciate that. I'd like to first start with a issue going on with the nuclear plants. Several nuclear plants that operate in the wholesale competitive markets have recently announced premature retirements for economic reasons. These plants tend to be highly reliable. Is FERC concerned about potential impacts of reliability of the electrical grid due to these retirements? Commissioner Bay, I might start with you on that.
So this is something that we are monitoring very closely. Certainly we are aware of the news of some of the retirements of those plants. And again, one of the things that we're doing is using our authority over the wholesale markets to see whether or not more effective or efficient price signals can be sent. And that's both in the capacity market as well as in the energy market. So that has been where we have been focusing our efforts. We can't, as I said, we don't pick winners in the energy markets. We try very hard to be resource neutral. I believe we have to be under the Federal Power Act. But that being said, improved price signals, improved transparency can be helpful to all efficient resources.
You know, one of the things that's going on, obviously, is with the coal-fired power plants coming down too. Now we have nuclear plants coming down, and one area that we're lacking in is the ability to build new gas pipelines too, to get to some of these plants. We find it through the industry very difficult, excuse me, to get the permits that are needed. And so I'll stick with you, Chairman Bay, for a little bit. Does FERC have the needed resources to handle these permitting issues? I mean, considering that the reliability, we can only take so much off the grid before reliability becomes an issue. And being that we're already concerned with the alarming amount of electricity leaving our grid, surely there's a way that we can speed up this process.
So we are very much focusing on the issue of the resources that we have that we devote to infrastructure project reviews. And one of the things that we've done in this past year is to increase the number of staff who are assigned to the division that does that particular work. So this is something that we're watching very carefully.
Watching, Chairman, no offense here, but watching isn't actually engaging. We are going to speed this process up of the amount of electricity hitting our grid going backwards in a very alarming rate. And so watching it is watching, a crash happen. I like to try to use the word of being proactive, not reactive. And if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're going to end up being is reactive.
I probably was not clear enough. We've added more resources. So we've created an additional branch of staff who are doing project reviews in the Office of Energy Projects. Having added those additional resources, we're continuing to monitor what happens. And as Commissioner Clark's testimony noted, actually more than 90% plus of the projects that we receive are certificated within 1 year after receiving the application. So it's important for us not only to do our work in a thorough way, but also in a timely way, and we're very much aware of that.
Is there a way that we can help you with this? Is there a resource that we can help you streamline? Is there a process that we can help engage in? I say we as those sitting on this, sitting up here on the committee.
I certainly would be interested in hearing the views of my colleagues on that particular question. But one thing we may be coming to you with for our next budget request is a request for more resources.
Money?
I think you could characterize it in that way, insofar as the money results in our ability to hire more people.
I think all that would come to with the idea of making sure we're being very responsible with the resources we have that's already been given for underneath the current circumstances. So my time has ran out, and Chairman, thank you so much for allowing me to ask these questions, and Chairman Bay, thank you for being very thoughtful with your answers.
This time the chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate what you all do. I know it's a tough job. I will say that we have some natural gas pipelines coming through my area, and earlier Commissioner Clark indicated, and I think some of you all have touched on it as well, that there are folks who are saying that they just want to slow everything down in order to stop gas pipelines and other things. But I have a situation where I've got folks who may feel that way, but I've got a lot of folks who just want answers to questions. And while in regard to the Mountain Valley Pipeline, certainly some of those issues were raised by the Mountain Valley Pipeline not contacting folks like the Roanoke County Board of Supervisors before announcing they were coming into the community and starting to do work. But likewise, the Roanoke and New River Valleys have a population of roughly 300,000. We've got a pipeline coming through. West Virginia, they had 4 hearings. In Virginia, we had 2. Only one was in the Roanoke Valley, New River Valley area directly. And so as a result of that, the Roanoke County Board of Supervisors requested an additional hearing. I'm not saying it would have been fun for your folks, but it would have been helpful. And likewise, because both Congressman Goodlatte and I thought that it was appropriate, we sent a letter saying we agree with them, and we would ask you to hold an additional hearing. You signed the letter, Commissioner, saying, yeah, we can't do that. I think that does sometimes makes the problem a little bit worse. I know it's not easy. I know that you, as you just said to my colleague, you may need more resources because of what's going on. But a lot of my folks are reasonable people, but when they feel like they're not getting answers, they become more aggressive. And as a result of that, both Craig County and Roanoke County, and I'm sure there were other factors, but one of the factors, they've both intervened in the process because they felt like that was the only way they could keep a finger on what was happening. So I don't know that there's anything you can comment on in a specific case. I just pointed out as a note. I've got a lot to get over and not as much time as I would like, of course. FERC's regulations currently require the agency to consider the use of existing right-of-ways, Commissioner Bay, Chairman Bay. What do you all do to make sure they actually look at existing right-of-ways? Because we recently had a factory that brought in natural gas, and now here we have another gas pipeline coming through generally the same area of Giles County, and then that's where the factory was. What do you all do to make sure that they actually did look at using co-location possibilities, particularly when you're looking at, my district has a lot of national forests and the Appalachian Trail. So what do you all do in that regard? And if you could be quick, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. So during our review process, we examined the impact of the proposed route, but also alternatives. And so if there is an existing right-of-way that is feasible, that can be very helpful both to the company and to FERC in making a decision about whether or not to certificate the project. So it certainly is a factor that we take into account.
So if folks in Roanoke County, Giles County, Craig County think that there's a better path that would be co-located, they should let you know. Is that what you're telling us?
Well, I should say that that is an option to be considered. In some cases, it is not easy to co-locate two pipelines where they're side by side. That can present its own challenges.
And I recognize that and appreciate that. I'm going to switch gears on you. I am concerned about grid reliability. I am concerned about the problems we had with MATS when several facilities in my district were closed down just before the Supreme Court ruled that they didn't do it right at the EPA. I am concerned that you all don't get notice under the Clean Power Plan for interaction about what's going to happen when the plants close down. These are great concerns. But I have one that may not seem as big, but a number of my colleagues have touched on the grid reliability issues, and that is the shore issues related to lakes where there are hydropower facilities and plants. And I'm concerned about private property rights, and I can't speak for any other state. But I have several of these located in or near my district, and as many of the members of the committee know, I'm a recovering attorney. I used to be a small-town country lawyer, and I've looked at the deeds. And so one of the things I have that I don't know that you all have taken into consideration, not only do I think folks ought to be able to use the lakes for recreational purposes, but I think there may actually be a taking that you all are unaware of, because in some of those deeds that I had an occasion to look at over the course of 28 years of private practice,
keep the lights on for customers, including what baseload brings. And I believe the markets will protect reliability. The difficulty, it's difficult anytime a power plant closes. And I used to work for a company that owned them. They have their huge economic drivers in their communities and all. And I think it's natural that a state would be concerned. But we're trying to do our job to make sure that where the power plants are needed for reliability, they don't close because they're fairly paid.
Okay, well, if reliability attributes and essential reliability services are being adequately compensated under current market rules, why do we see units that are essential to maintaining reliability leaving the market?
Well, it's a little bit of a circle, because if they are essential to maintain reliability and we still have reliability, they should not be closing. Some of the rules that we put in place...
But they are.
Well, some of the rules that we've put in place are fairly new, and we've just started to run the first couple auctions, and I think we will see impacts. We've seen baseload plans that previously didn't clear the auctions clear in new auctions under the new rules.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Clark, I understand that under the Clean Power Plan, traditional state-based least cost resource planning will need to be replaced with carbon resource planning. What are the implications of such a shift? Would this environmental dispatch be more expensive than traditional economic dispatch, and if so, how so?
It depends on how each of those states will decide to implement their plans. It could be through some sort of credit trading program. It could be through some sort of perhaps environmental dispatch, which really would conflict with the market. So we don't know exactly how they'll all be proposing to meet their standards. It probably does mean in certain states significant increased costs. I would say another impact on the similar question that what you'd asked Chairman Bay and Commissioner LaFleur is I think 111D regulation, the potential of that is having an impact on some of these states that have restructured their marketplace as they see nuclear units close. Even if they may not be needed for quote-unquote reliability, in order to meet the Clean Power Plan, they may be needed because it's very difficult to replace a large baseload unit that emits no carbon. And so I think it's causing some of the states to go back to, as I said earlier, some form of soft re-regulation of their marketplace, simply to keep that plant open in the state, not for market efficiencies or for reliability, but to meet the constricts of the Clean Power Plan.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired.
Gentleman's time has expired, and that concludes questions from the members. I want to thank commissioners once again. We appreciate your being here with us. We look forward to continued work with you. Just one follow-up question I had, Chairman Bay. How many people are in your legal department? Do you know that number?
I believe there are about 180 people in the Office of General Counsel.
And do you know how many pending lawsuits there are against FERC in which FERC is a defendant?
Do you mean in a regulatory context, or do you mean?
I mean the regulatory process has been exhausted, and now we're in federal court or Court of Appeals or Supreme Court.
I know that there are 2 matters pending before the Supreme Court. I can probably get this information for you. I don't know it off the top of my head. Yeah. Certainly, every year there are commission orders that are appealed to the Court of Appeals. Right. And then there are some other matters that are being litigated at the district court level.
Ms. LaFleur.
Well, just to chime in, most of those 180 lawyers work on generating commission orders that are outgoing for the 6,000 cases we do a year, including there are ones that work on projects and ones that work on rates. There's maybe 10 to 20 people that work on our cases in the courts of appeal, something like a dozen. Yeah. It's a small group.
And what is the total budget for FERC at this time?
I believe FERC's total budget is a little over $300 million.
Okay. Do you have anything else, Jerry? No. Okay, well, thank you all so much. We look forward to working with you, and the hearing's adjourned. The record will be kept open for 10 days for additional materials, and thank you all once again.